and we are on air. Good afternoon, good morning, and good part of day. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining one of the series of New York City Large Scale Scrum Meetup, the series of virtual events. Today, we're honored to have in the virtual studio my friend and colleague, Alan Dinner, and I'm hoping I'm not bastardizing your last name, Alan.
A little bit, but that's okay.
You'll
I'm
correct
used
me
to
later.
it.
Yep. Ellen is a product coach and CEO of EBG Consulting, and she's focused on helping product and development communities produce valuable outcomes through product agility. She is known in the Agile community as an instigator and innovator for collaborative practices for Agile product discovery and using skilled facilitation to enable healthy work and strong organization. She is the author of a couple of books, and at her spare time, she's the producer of Boston's Agile Product Open Community and the director of Agile Alliance Agile Product Management Initiative. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the baton over to Ellen. And with Ellen's permission, I'm going to be recording this so it will become available to others that were not as fortunate to join the event. So if you have any, if you do not have any objections, it's on air and the podium is yours.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks for the intro. I don't need to get into add much more. But one thing that I would say is that I've worked with organizations whose products are commercial as well as for internal use. And one thing that a lot of organizations have been struggling with, or maybe even realizing more so now, particularly as they're moving to becoming agile and lean, is that they're realizing they don't have a handle on actually what their products are. And that's a very uncomfortable truth that needs to be rectified. As we'll see, there's a lot of implications for that. And so the work that I've been doing in a variety of different organizations. That's sort of a vanity slide, if you will, about that. And I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Andy Repton, who's out in London. We worked together on an earlier version of this, a workshop version at the LESS conference 2 years ago, sharing some of experiences in his very large bank, global bank, where we did some of the work around product definition. So,
by the way, when the thumbs up to Andy, I know him well.
Yeah, great, yeah. He's a great guy. So product development is really about the ongoing discovery and delivery of products that are desirable to customers, feasible from a technology point of view, and need to be viable from a business point of view. We need to know what those products are. So I have a question for all of you on this webinar. What is your product? So what I'm going to do next is ask a couple of questions, about 3 questions. And here's where I want you to use chat. So make sure you fire up the chat. And I'll give you multiple choice answers. So the first question is about your customers. My product's customers are A, internal, B, external, C, both, or you're not sure. So use the chat, get a little poll of how people are. Okay, a lot of C, B. Yep, we've got a mix. We have some that are internal. Thank you for sharing that. Really does look like a mix. A lot of you, though, are saying C, seeing a lot of C. Okay, let's try another question. And this is what your product is in terms of its shape and form. Is it software, A, software, hardware, C, software and hardware? Is it a service? Or E is a combination? So A, E, okay. A lot of software, some using a combination. A and D. All right, services. Yes, a lot of products actually include services. That's part of how you can define the product. All right, then here's a third question. Does your product provide, is it the primary source of revenue? So A would be it's a commercial product, commercially sold. No is B, we use it internally. Or C, it's both a source of revenue and we use it So I see a lot of B's, internal, some A's. Okay. All right. A's and B's, a C, both. All right, a mix. So these are some of the things you think about when you're shaping your definition of product. I'm going to define a product as a software application, a system, a device, a service, or a combination that provides value to customers and business partners. So the big question is, so what? Who cares? Why does it matter having a definition of your product? And I think you'll see that the impact of your product definition is immense. First of all, it impacts backlogs. How many backlogs do you have? How big are the backlogs? How wide are those backlogs? And when you think about customers, who are the customers that you're that have problems that you care about or opportunities you're trying to solve? This impacts your market research, market segments, the demographics, the competitive work that you do. And then, of course, there's the metrics. Now, of course, you have impact metrics that are often revenue, cost saving, monthly active users, and so forth. But then there's customer. These two are interdependent. There's customer outcome metrics, like things around engagement, or retention, adoption, happiness, task completion. What you use as metrics depends on what your product is. And then, of course, strategy and roadmap. So your strategy is actually an important input to doing the roadmap. The strategy is your framework for setting direction with the product. And so, knowing your product is essential for setting that strategy and then having an ongoing agile roadmap. And then the team design. I mean, your team, how you align the teams, how you form the teams, how your organization is designed, is best defined based, as we'll see, on the product. And of course, who needs to be involved in, who makes decisions about product stuff, investments, and so forth, and who needs to be engaged and involved in those decisions. That's another impact on your decision. And then who are the PMs? And I don't mean, some people use that for project, I mean product manager. Who are the product managers or product owners? Who are the best candidates for that in the organization? So there's a huge impact on this decision about what are the products. So let's try something. Gene, we're going to do a little experiment and unmute people, because I'm going to show you a question, a criteria, and I want you to yell out true or false, a criteria for defining product. So Gene, you want to give us some audio here? You're on mute, Gene.
Yeah, I unmuted everyone else. Hold on.
Okay.
Everyone is unmuted, and off they go.
Okay, we're going to try a little experiment here, folks.
Yes,
so
Tim.
What I'm going to ask you to do is yell out.
I'm chatting with them.
I'm going to ask you to yell out yes or no. All right?
Gotcha.
Is this a criteria for defining product? True or false?
Yeah.
Customer's view, true or false?
Yes.
I said, hey, any chance you're out of Jersey City?
Not going to work.
He said, yeah, but now I'm in Tampa and Charlotte working. I said, wow, my mother-in-law may have attended a dance studio with your wife.
Right.
I recall stories of a man named Arthur entertaining her grandson.
Gene, let's sound off. Somebody's doing something.
So, wow, that's when she was teaching Zumba.
Hey, Zumba, mute yourself, please.
Yeah, Mr. Zumba. Okay, I don't think this is going to work because Mr. Zumba.
Yeah, that's the challenge we're having. People don't pay attention to the request to mute themselves. So hopefully we can have another experiment. Yeah. So apologies.
So customer's view, true. Now type in chat. Is this a criteria that the product is short-lived? True or false? What do you think? Product is short-lived. What do you think? I see false, true, false. You are correct. It is false. False. The product's long-lived. How about a product, true or false? It spans the customer's journey. True or false? Spans journey. Yes. Good, good. Everybody's typing in true. You got it. All right. Here's another criteria. The product includes services and components. True or false? Excellent. That is absolutely true. It is defined as narrowly as possible. True or false?
Hey, it's the last community. You got to be getting false. Is that?
Most people are correctly saying false, and we're going to get into this topic shortly.
Yep.
And one more criteria: can have multiple product backlogs. True or false? All right, most of you are correctly answering false. One product, one backlog. All right. What I want to share with you are 5 principles that I found very useful for defining your product, and some of the tools that I've used in various multiple organizations to help define the product. And let's start with principle number 1. I don't know if anybody has seen this or read this book. I've read Alan Cooper's book, Inmates Are Running the Asylum. Alan wrote this book, I think it was, 2004. And it's the title is based on a bizarre cult movie where there's an insane asylum and there's a fluid exchange that happens between the inmates and the doctors. So the doctors become the inmates and the inmates become the doctors. And I don't know whether you get sort of what's happening, the switch that's happening, but in the book, Alan talks about the fact that many products make users feel stupid. And it's because developers are designing and developing the product from their own point of view, from their technical point of view. And so they're defining the product from the inside out point of view, and we need to shift to an outside customer focused point of view. So one of the tools, and there are many, and this is one example of a tool that I found useful over the years, is this product canvas. And it's actually a 2-part canvas that I've used with many different clients for a number of years and involved. You can get a copy of this, download this. But let's just focus on that middle row here, where we have product partners. The business on the left, the customer there in the center, and then the technology. And we think about what they value. So it's critical to understand who are the customers. You define your product from the outside in. And so in workshops, we'll do that exercise. These are some examples from some various product definition workshops. We look at those 3 partners and get a shared understanding of who the customers are. The thing is that what we want to do is, I have this heart here, because what we want to do is fall in love with the customer's problem. We want to love that problem. We want to have empathy for that customer and their problem. So another tool that I found useful for that is using the value proposition canvas. And that's from the Strategizer group, the same group that created the business model generation canvas. And in some cases, what I've done is asked the executives and leaders to conduct interviews. I do it in a pair, have them do a pair interview with customers, and then go back and capture their pains and their gains and their jobs to be done, and share that with each other. That's what we did, like in the case in the top right. On the bottom, we had the community knew enough about the customers. They didn't need to do that interviewing, so they sort of already had proto-personas, and we built the value proposition. So the point here is that you're understanding the product from the customer point of view. So here's a question for you. Thinking about your product, your customers, do you understand their pains and gains and jobs to be done? Yes, we are deeply connected with that. That would be A. B, somewhat C here, not really. So I have a bunch of, a little bit BC. You know, it's interesting, as you can see, Gene, that most people are saying B. There's only a few people, at least, that are polling in here that are saying we're deeply connected. And that's a little sad. We want to be very connected with our customer. So the principle here is that we need to define the product from the outside in. Now let's look at another principle. So we have projects. Projects are these short-lived things that help us deliver some capability, and the projects serve the products. We need to have a perspective of products over projects. Those projects are just in service to the product, which is long-lived. And the product has a life cycle from birth to death, and hopefully stuff happens in between, and it's a long life cycle. If you look at the classic model from Kotler and Keller from marketing, and you look at, this is just a generic model, but it's very well known in product management. You look at the phases, you introduce the product, it grows, then it is in maturity, and then it goes into decline. And of course, you have ultimate, if you have a commercial software product, the sales is at the top of that maturity level. And so in introduction, you're doing a lot of R&D, you're launching the product, you're trying to gain customer share and market share. During growth, you start to see some economies of scale, and you invest in the product further, you watch out for the competition. And in maturity, of course, you want to milk that as long as you possibly can. You have to be very careful about competitors that may have parity capabilities that you have to match. And you go into decline either because you've tapped out the market, or the customers switch, or it's just a shrinking market for your product. So this is a classic life cycle for a product which is long-lived, right? And your goal is, if you have a mature product, is to stay there as long as possible. And if you're in a high growth mode, to decide, you know, what actions you might take to move into maturity and find your market space. So growth often is very much about product market fit. So if I turn back to the canvas, what I found useful is to think about, to have the leaders, product people think about what is that competitive landscape. So if you look there on the bottom left, who are the competitors? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Who's the leader in the field? And this is very much core to good competitive intelligence, competitive analysis that any good PM, product manager, is going to think of. One thing, though, you have to watch out. We found that in a number of groups, you have to look out because they'll say, oh, this is a new product, but actually it's an evolution or a new technical capability or innovation for an existing product. It's really not a new product. It's taking a product that may be mature and adding some capabilities or innovation to it. And we can find, the canvas helps find that or query that, because there on the bottom left, we look at innovation waves, like what's coming down the pike in terms of platforms and standards that will help evolve the product, but doesn't mean that it's a distinct, completely different product. So the principle here is that we want to look at the long view of the product, right? Product thinking is long-term thinking of the product. So let's look at the third principle. And this is about how narrowly or broad you define the product. How narrowly or broad. This is of huge importance. So I'm going to ask you some questions and have you answer narrow or broad. The product backlog tends to have more technical items. Is that a product that's defined narrow or broad? Let's use our chat again. Yes, narrow, very narrow. That's a big sign that we have not defined the product broadly. Yes, okay. Here's another question. shared components are worked on by multiple cross-functional teams. What do you think here? Narrow or broad? Yep, broad. So those components are shared across teams. Yes, very good. All right. So there's often a need for coordinator roles. What are your thoughts here? Is that narrow or broad? Yeah, narrow, because you have probably lots of backlogs and you have to do a lot of coordination. You don't need those roles if you've defined your product broadly. And how about prioritization? Is it simpler if you have a narrow or broadly defined product? What do you think here? Broad, yes. Yes, you can't, it's very difficult to look at multiple backlogs and try to understand and rectify pieces of a decision that you have to make about options if you have lots of different pieces. You have a much higher, broader perspective. You have a much global, holistic perspective of what your options for prioritization are when you define the product broadly. How about features? Do they tend to get duplicated if you are defining your product narrowly or broadly? What do you think here? Yeah, narrow. Same feature or elements of the same feature show up. So you can see, you know, there's a ton of inefficiencies when you're doing the product definition narrowly. And then here's a real bugaboo, a real killer: dependency resolution. If you have, is it easier if you have the product defined in a narrow way or in a broad way? Yeah, broad. Exactly. Yep. So from these questions, once again, the thing that we're striving for is to define the product as broadly as possible or as practical. And there may be times when you can't, you have to limit, constrain that definition because of factors like organization structure that you can't change, or you have external partners and so forth. So you want to, though, go as broad as possible. The canvas, again, that product canvas part 2, here's a very simple, elegantly simple tool I found that helps people think more broadly. And that is the second dimension, the interface dimension, which looks at the connections that your product has to user systems and devices. So here's a very simple example. This example is squeaky clean scheduling from our Discover to Deliver book. The center of that circle is that area or the scope. Let's say, in our case, it's your product, right? Then you have these lines, arrows going in and out. Those are the actual interfaces. That's the information, or if it's a device, messages that the product has to respond to. And if there are inflows and if there are outflows, that's what comes out, right? Innies and outies if you want. And the boxes are the entities, can be people, places, or devices. Very simple diagram. Now, what I've found is that we can have people draw that diagram. So in this case, in this example on the left, the team thought they had, you know, a product. And they drew this diagram. Obviously, I sketched out a lot of things so you can't see the specifics. But they drew the diagram, and at the same time, another team, for their quote product, drew a diagram for the context diagram for their product. And what they discovered was they had some of the exact same boxes and the exact same interfaces. So why were they defining them as separate products? And here's another example of that. So when people take a look at those external entities and the interfaces, and they see, oh, this other product has these same stuff, really it is one overall product. It's a very simple tool. Another thing that I found is that people get really confused with features and components. So the dimension, the canvas around actions would be where things like features, those capabilities would be. And the environment dimension are all the technical platforms and software, hardware components and standards and so forth. So an exercise I found really helpful to distinguish features from components is where we ask people to, I've done it a couple of different ways, to create a pyramid, sideways or top down, and name the product, list the features, and then show the components underlying them. Or in the example that you see over on the bottom left, with that team, I had them do a donut where the features were all around the outside and the supporting components were on the inside. And that gives people a much more holistic understanding of what their product is, lets them see where the same features and components are used across multiple different products when they're not defining them as broadly as possible. Very simple but powerful exercises. So the principle here is that we don't want to define the product, of course, as broadly as possible. So let's talk about the fourth principle. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this chart, the different organization charts for well-known organizations. And you kind of can tell that you would laugh if you look at that. It sort of makes sense because their products feel like that. The Oracle products, for example, are very hierarchical. Well, why is that? Well, there's something many of you may be familiar with already called Conways Law, where organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of these organizations. And you can read that Mel Conway's paper, by the way, online. So basically, your organization, how your organization looks is how you're going to build the product, how the architecture of the product will look. So it could be kind of messy if your org structure is messy. There's a video, it's about 10 minutes, which I really urge you to watch, that Michael James created. And he talks about, in this video, you can find it on YouTube, that many teams make the mistake of having a team output owner, where each team has their own backlog. And you end up with this nutty structure like this, where there's lots of little backlogs and lots of little team output owners, sort of not really product owners because they're overseeing the team's backlog, and the harm that that does to the overall product. And if you really think about it, each team is going to optimize for their own little piece. So in this causal loop diagram, if we think about how many backlogs or lists of stuff that you have, and think about the number of items on the right, the number of items worked on in a sprint that are highest value to the company, there's not a positive effect. So the more backlogs you have, it has a strong opposite effect. It delays the ability for teams to be working on the most important things. Causal loop diagrams, by the way, I found are really helpful tools for, in particular for leaders to understand product thinking. And these are just a couple of the variables. If you've taken the large-scale Scrum training, you may be familiar with using this tool as a powerful learning tool. So we want to optimize for the entire system, not just locally, for the health and well-being of our product. If you're not familiar with Craig Larman's laws, you definitely want to look at that. They truly are brilliant. The fifth law is that the culture follows structure. So your organization structure, how you design the overall system, has a big impact on your ability to be successful with your product. And what we find is that what we want to have happen is have the structure follow product. So you define your product as broadly as possible. And from there, you can find highly cohesive, loosely coupled chunks or product areas. Those may be feature teams, as often referred to, which have end-to-end value stream responsibility for that area of the product. So while, as Craig says, that culture follows structure, the corrective action is to have structure follow product, a well-defined, as broad as possible product. So the last principle I want to talk about is how you go about getting to that point. And I want to share you some experiments from product thinking workshops in multiple organizations, including the one that I mentioned earlier that Andy worked at, where we ran a number of these product thinking workshops, multi-day, 3 to 4 day sessions. Some of these in his organization, some of these organizations are very large, and the participants are responsible for the outcome. And what's really interesting, when we stepped back and did some meta thinking about what's happening in these work sessions, these facilitated workshops, in the way people are thinking about their product. You know, at first they're not competent, they're unconsciously incompetent about product thinking. So it's like, all right, whatever. Then we use various exercises. I like to use Kahoot quiz to ask them questions, or that feature component exercise, or let's focus on really a glossary of core terms. And then they're like, oh, okay, WTF, just realizing maybe I don't understand really what product thinking is about. Let's explore more. Interviews, context diagrams I showed you earlier, role maps, is not, it's an exercise I'm going to give you an example of. Do more work to expand their thinking, and oh, I'm starting to get it. Now let's focus in on what is the product. Use that canvas. Okay, we have an exercise I've got, actually you can read it online. I have the whole description called Discover to Deliver exercises in one of my blogs that I've used quite a bit. And we do some team design. So we design the organization, and then it gets real, and they become conscious and consciously competent about product thinking and being able to define what their product is. So just to give you a very small example in terms of product thinking and the glossary, this is very, very simple. First, define what the basic terms are. And this is just a photo from a workshop where I defined those terms, sent those to people ahead of time to think about, and reviewed those. And so you write it, you use it, you refine it. All the time people are collaborating to do this product definition. Another very simple tool that I found incredibly powerful is this is not, or I'm not sure. So what we do here is we ask people as a homework assignment to get a list of all the things they think are, quote, products. This is particularly powerful in medium and large organizations. And we write them on a card. Now, and then we ask them to do a sorting exercise. So we'll mix them into different affinity groups, and on a poster, they will say, this is a product, this is not, or I'm not sure, based on those glossary definitions. And so, you know, components and applications show up, not broadly thinking. And we'll do a couple of rounds of this. And this really opens up people's eyes to what really is probably just an application or a component, as not in and of itself, broadly speaking, a product. The canvas is another tool that I found in multiple organizations to be really helpful. And we'll prep it and walk through it and refine it in the workshop. Now, another thing I think is really important and sometimes not paid enough attention to is product thinking and defining your product is around decision making. So I like to use a decision model that's adapted from Sam Kainer's work, where we look at common decision rules and participatory decision rules, and to reach agreement both on what the product is and a decision on who's going to decide how to decide on product investments, we use this decision-making model. And it makes decision-making very transparent, okay? So after these kind of workshops, we'll do potentially, in addition to refining the canvas, other tools. I mentioned the value proposition canvas. We also might use journey maps or other flow diagrams around the product. And the leaders will build an improvement backlog, and we'll do organizational alignment and training and liftoffs of teams and coaching and discovery sessions. Okay, so this is often what happens when a team is going through a transformation, as you know, and as Les tells us, we need to define the product first. Okay, so the key here is to do that, we need to do it in a collaborative way. So to summarize the principles, we want to be outside in. We want to take the art of the long view and go as broad as possible. Remember that your structure follows product, and we need to collaborate. Okay. So the product is about discovery and delivery to get to that high value product, the one that's viable and feasible and desirable. And we need to define that product using those principles to get the best possible outcomes. What I think we should do now is take some questions, right?
Absolutely. Alan, you are the one who sets the tone. We got 20 minutes remaining, and if you would like to, would you like to take some questions by voice, or people pinging in the chat and you reading them?
Let's do it by voice. And by the way, and obviously you'll see this in the deck, I have some other reading things also that will be here.
Yep.
And thank you for putting in the link to MJ's video. That's in the chat. That's excellent. Yep. So, you know, I covered a lot of material, but I wanted to get to those principles. I'm really delighted to be able to take some questions at this point.
And the two I'm going to answer right off the bat. Yes, the deck will be shared. And yes, the video is being recorded for those that either joined late or would like to share it with their colleagues. Please ask questions, folks.
Are you going to do an unmute or ask people?
I'd rather people unmute themselves explicitly. This way I don't unmute people that are sharing their life stories.
Hey, Alan, this is David Geisler. Question to you is, what happens if you're midstream? Say you're joining a project and you're already midstream, the company's already midstream on their program. How do you flip gears there?
If you're working on a project and they want to define the product, is that what you're flipping midstream?
Meaning you've gone a few sprints into it. They think they have the product. They think they have the right organization, which is pretty standard, right? You know, you start, you create a backlog and you get ready, but from what you're saying is that get this at the get-go, which absolutely makes sense. But if I'm, say, joining as a coach on a product that's already gone, say, a couple months in, how do you persuade, or what is a pivot point to change the direction to follow your techniques?
Well, I mean, those techniques, by the way, are tools to get your product well defined. I would say that if you suspect, if you're a coach or even a member of a team, and you suspect that you're not really defining your product broadly, or using the other principles, stop and do that. You could start asking questions like, who are the customers for this product? In fact, unless the first question you ask is ask the customers what the product is, and then you expand and contract. So if you have multiple backlogs, are those backlogs really about solving the same problem for a customer? Start with the question, the outside-in question of who are the customers. But I would say that if you start, you keep just going down from sprint to sprint with something that really is not as broadly defined as it needs to be, it's just delaying the inevitable. That a pause and a pause to clarify that is going to have big paybacks.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Like your hat.
Hey, Ellen, I have submitted to you a few questions ahead of time. Did I not? I did not. I have a few that were sent to me offline ad hoc. So if no one steps up and asks you now, I'm happy to fill in the air and get you. I'm actually going to be paraphrasing. I don't have it in front of me. I don't have them in front of me at the moment. But
Okay.
I'll reserve my right to do it later.
Okay. So, and I'll just say while people are thinking about this, doing this product definition, doing this work, my experience has been doing it with organizations that realize they need to become product-centric and customer-focused. Also organizations that were embarking on agile transformation. Last year, I worked with an organization that was trying to figure out whether or not to even productize something that their internal, this is in financial services, that their internal people were using. And there was a huge opportunity to potentially turn this into a product that would be extremely profitable. So defining even what that product was, and we did this in a multi-day workshop with lots of prep and brought in the board of directors at the end of that. So, this is, it has multiple applications and being very clear what your product is.
Ellen, I'm going to treat myself as a guest. If no one asks a question, I have one coming from me.
Please.
So, but I'll count to 3. 1, 2.
I have one question.
Please go.
So just kind of a big picture view. As a product manager, how do you envision a transformation where the product manager does not own road mapping and budget, but owns delivery?
That's not product management, in my opinion, and probably others as well. So delivery is engineering or development. A product manager, there's a lot of, seems like maybe confusion about what product management is about. Product management is looking at the health and well-being of that whole life cycle of the product, and how you could have a product manager who's not overseeing the roadmap and the strategy doesn't make any sense. PM will, go ahead.
Yeah, not necessarily oversee it, but have no authority, right? You might have the ability to be part of that road mapping and part of the budget, but not have the authority to dictate what you spend your budget on.
And who does have the authority to, quote, dictate, as you say?
I don't know. I think that's the difficulty that the system is having in the transformation.
I'm sorry, who does?
The system IT, our system IT.
IT, the technology organization?
Correct.
Okay, so that, to me, that's a really vital error. So you want to have product management. This is another thing that organizationally is, particularly for large organizations, I found really, really tough. You want to have PM organization and a technology organization, engineering, IT, whatever. They are in parallel, reporting in, if you think structurally, reporting in, say, to CEO. So there's a healthy tension there that's actually really good. The technology people are obviously concerned about technology and innovations, and the product people are concerned with the long-term health and well-being of the product as well. So I've seen where if technology has that authority, they're going to make decisions that may not be good for the product. I remember in one case, and we did have a PM, product manager, and on the technology side, and the head of architecture is a global organization, wanted to start using Hadoop for data storage for good reasons. I mean, obviously the technology, it would save a lot of money and so forth. However, the capability that they were looking at had to do with HIPAA, the Healthcare Affordability Act in the US that is highly regulated. And they had not, the PM asked the question, have you tested this from a security and privacy point of view? Well, no, said the architect, but this would be a really good project, this capability they were building out to do this. And this was around mass quantities of claim data. And the PM said, I can't risk that, okay? So the PM rightly had the authority, and she was having to balance the operating expense benefits, as well as the fact that in that market, in terms of skills, it's really hard to get good devs and engineers, but the need for having that privacy and not risking in their market having a problem was much more important. She had the decision-making authority, and that's the way it should be. It should be within the product organization.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah. Anyone else, folks? I got a tingling one here.
You have what?
Hi, Ellen. Oh,
Hi.
sorry. So we have a group of us here. We were wondering if you can give us a definition or an example of a broad definition versus a narrow definition, and when the broad definition might become something larger, like a solution or something, an initiative or something larger.
Okay, let's go with the first one. I'm not sure I followed the second question. So you wanted an example of a narrow versus a broad definition.
Yeah.
So one organization I work with handles payments from cities and keeping track of traffic violations and so forth. And when they first went into thinking about what their product was, each of the individual applications were considered a separate product. But really it was the management, I can't recall, I'd have to look up the name that they ended up coming up with, but the overall management of all of that, all of those transactions within a city, all of that management was a single product. It was a single product with services also wrapped around it. But they were just thinking at an application level. You know, that would be an example, or where you're thinking that an individual component is a product in and of itself, but really it's not. It's part of a broad product from the customer point of view. You know, in banking, account management is everything that I want to be able to do, from, you know, looking up things to taking money out to transferring money. All of those activities from my point of view of a customer, that's managing my money management, not the individual apps that make up money management. Okay, so I think that first principle around outside in, ask the customer, is really powerful. Does that give you some idea?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
And your second question, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I was just sort of wondering if at some point, like, when does the definition become so broad that it's something even larger than a product, that it's like a suite or something above that?
Okay.
Or is that even?
Yeah, no, well, that's an interesting point, because a suite where you have a set of products or product lines, they would be separate products, but they may share, often in a suite of products, they have a common infrastructure. So they would have a shared roadmap, and they may also have, so they have a shared roadmap for the common infrastructure, and then each product might have their own individual roadmap. So there's a relationship in product lines or suites. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
If I may just add to this, Alan, so in large-scale Scrum, we also have the concept of always challenging the current definition of a product portfolio, because the majority of those are fake. They just staple together a bunch of projects and programs that are very traditional.
Yeah.
So potential, there could be a product portfolio that is a true suite of products, like in large, in less huge. We can discuss how each product area, requirements area, could be aligned with the conventional definition of the suite, so that we need to understand how this all maps. But of course, majority of these are artificial staplings. You know, we got, that's what we say, fake portfolio. Because
Right.
I have a question about that, by the way, but let me give it back to you. 7 minutes we got remaining before we have to wrap. Folks, any more questions?
Hey, this is Ravi. I have a question to Ellen. Okay. So especially when a large financial organization who have traditionally been doing product development, application development, who have a bunch of multiple systems come in play and make the final value to the customer, right? So in that type of setup, obviously most of the people are doing application-wise focus. Which what would you encourage, or what would you suggest for them to move towards a product-based approach?
To move, you mean in terms of organizationally, or?
So there are, let's say, 10, 15 teams, and each one trying to own one or two application, maybe more. But at the end of the day, it is the underlying system, which is like not front-facing to the customer. Not necessary to deliver value, direct value to the customer. It could be internal and etc. So
so they're just working on systems or individual applications, not serving some need from an end-to-end customer point of view. Remember, it all starts and ends with the customer. So, I have found that by using these principles and defining the product as broadly as you can, and then forming teams around around, let's say, features or product areas that, once again, highly cohesive, but loosely coupled to other product areas. So something that might be what you're calling a system or an application could be part or a component, if you will, of different product areas. Right? So it's not one team owns that application. In service to that end-to-end capability, multiple teams would share using that particular component. So again, structure needs to follow product. So the best thing to do is restructure the organization, redesign the organization around what the product truly is.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, and honestly, it's painful, because that means a very difficult change for a lot of organizations. And, then you get into roles and what's going to happen to my job, and, how does this impact where I go forward? So we need to use, Craig Larman talks about informed consent. So I think I have found that you have to start with the leadership in their understanding the impacts. There's obviously tremendous benefits. It's the way to go, but they also need to understand the impact that it's going to have to people and their roles and their jobs, and the different thinking that people need to have, that, I just don't own this little system. My work is in service to the product as a whole and to the customer, right? And it actually makes your work more joyful, because you're doing the right thing for the customer. That's what we want to be doing.
Just as a quick follow-up to that question then, so what percentage of the time do you find that large organizations are actually able and willing to make that structural change, where, for instance, you've got shared code ownership of what have previously been systems owned by a single team supporting many different product lines?
Yeah. I can't give you a percentage statistic on that. I think it takes real leadership to understand the value of doing that. And sometimes if you are working in a very hierarchical organization, it's definitely harder. But this is why starting with the leaders go first, I think is really important. We can't just do this bottom up. It needs to be top down and bottom up. And we don't want to forget the messy middle, the middle management. So you really have to approach it from a holistic point of view. So no, you ask, it is a very, it's a tough thing for organizations to do, because people are, stuck in their hierarchies and their roles, and it can be scary.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you that it's the right thing to do. My experience is that it's very hard to persuade people that it is the right thing to do. So I'm just wondering, what techniques have you used historically to make that sort of, to demonstrate to people and get their buy-in that it's actually the right thing to do?
Yeah. Well, one is that using these workshops and collaborating around using these principles, and where they build the definition of the product. The second thing I think that has been really powerful is using those causal loop diagrams, because that's just such an elegantly powerful tool, because we're so used to, we're just humanly focused on local optimization, just our piece of the world. And those diagrams let you see the whole picture and the impact of what you do in one area, how it has a broader effect on other areas. So from leaders, system thinking, and exercises around system thinking, with the causal loop diagram being like one of the best, that stuff works.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the question. And Alan, I'm actually realizing that we're 1 minute away before we need to wrap. We can probably take a few minutes to stay on if you would like to, but we need to wrap shortly thereafter. So first of all, I wanted to thank you before everyone starts dropping for doing this. And I can tell you with all honesty, I actually did not expect this to be so much less centric as it turned out to be. I mean, the stuff that you have described, I mean, I can probably parse every sentence has something to do with, that's exactly how we recommend this when we do Scrum or large scale Scrum adoption. So it's a product centric conversation, of course, but so much relates. So do you want to give maybe like a closing statement or something that is specific? I mean, I'm just going to give you a few extra minutes here. And of course, the deck and the recording would be available for everyone. With
right.
hopefully some additional references, because we just don't have enough time, right? You talk about local optimization versus global optimization, products, portfolio. I mean, it's just stuff that there's immense amount of information out there in this.
Yeah. Do I have a closing statement per se?
Anything you wanted to say? I mean, anything that, there's some great information you have, the readings that you're referring to on your site.
Yeah, they're all on the blog. You can find that stuff on the blog. I don't really have a closing statement per se, aside from, we know that defining that our product, a good definition of the product, is the right thing to do. It's a joyful thing to do, and it makes our work life so much better.
Well, these are great words. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
Thanks everyone who
thank you everyone for joining. I will start recording shortly, and once I do, it will save into the cloud, and I'll try to make it available in the next day or two.
Okay.
And please keep coming back to the meetup. We're gonna have more virtual events coming up. In fact, some of these going to be follow-ups of Alan's, like Michael James will be speaking about his product owner versus team output owner in a couple of weeks. So you may as well check it out.
Yeah, that definitely is going to be a good talk.
Excellent.
Thank you, Gene, for everything you do for the community.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. My pleasure.
Ciao. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. Shall I stop sharing? You're going to turn off the...
Yep. You're off air.